Perfect. Thank you all for joining us today for our presentation about visa options for investors and entrepreneurs in the United States. My name is Dustin Saldarriaga, and I am a senior associate with Scott Legal PC here in New York City. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Our firm does specialize in business immigration, which is the topic that we're talking about today, though we do handle the full spectrum of U.S. immigration law, whether that's family-based immigration, temporary visas like student visas or visitor visas. So we really do hope that you'll reach out to us if you have any questions at all about U.S. immigration. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. This webinar is part of a series. We try to do at least one webinar a week, and those do touch on, again, a variety of U.S. immigration topics. So we'll, after this presentation, send you an email where you can sign up for our future webinars. We hope to see you on those as well. This webinar is being recorded. We post our full-length webinars to our YouTube channel, as well as shorter videos as well, and those also touch on a variety of immigration options in the U.S. We're really proud to put high-quality, great information online on our YouTube channel for free. So we do hope you'll check that out. After this presentation, that email we send you will also have a copy of the PowerPoint that you see on your screen. So hopefully that helps with note-taking. We also will send you a link where you can visit our blog, which also has great information for free, as well as a link where you can schedule a consultation with us. So during the presentation, we don't get into client-specific questions that are specific to your circumstances. We prefer to do that over a consultation for your privacy and because it gives us a chance to really talk about the specifics of your circumstances. But if you do have a question during the presentation, please do send those in via chat or the Q&A function on Zoom. I will be monitoring those. I'll probably save questions for the end, but I do plan to get through all questions during the presentation, so don't hesitate. One final brief note is that I think something that sets our firm apart is that our founder, Ian Scott, actually started our firm on an E-2 visa. The firm is still an E-2 company. So Ian has personally navigated the process of not just the E-2 visa, but also a TN visa, H-1B, F-1 student visa. So him having navigated the process really does inform the way that we work with our clients. We've seen it from both sides, and that does set us apart. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started in our presentation. And I'll go back real quick to the title screen. So the options we'll really be focusing on today are the E-2 visa, the EB-1, the National Interest Waiver, or EB-2, National Interest Waiver, and the EB-5. So just to give a very high-level introduction to these, immigration in the U.S., meaning options for you to come from a country abroad to the United States, are in two big buckets. So the first bucket is temporary visas, and those like the name implies, only allow you to come to the US for a certain period of time or a certain number of visits. And at the end of that period of time or those visits, you do need to leave the US. So temporary visas include visitor visas, they include student visas, they also include the E-2 visa. So the E-2 is the temporary visa option that we will be talking about today. Now, even though the E-2 is a temporary option, you can renew the E-2 visa. So you can have it for years and years, but it is not a green card. Okay, the other options you see on your screen, the EB-1, the National Interest Waiver, and the EB-5, these are green card options. So these do give you permanent residency, and once you've held them for a certain period of time, you become eligible to become a U.S. citizen if you choose to naturalize. So again, keep in mind two big buckets. The E-2 is in that temporary bucket. The EB-1, National Interest Waiver, and EB-5 are in the green card bucket. So let's start by talking about the E-2 visa. The reason we focus on this visa for entrepreneurs is that if someone comes to our firm and they want to build or start a business in the US, this is going to be probably the first option we consider, just because it is such a great option. The application process is not particularly heavy. It's pretty fast. So if you do qualify and you want to come to the US to build a business, the E2 really is a great option. Now, one important aspect of the E2 is that it is a treaty visa, and that means that the country that you have a passport from needs to have an E2 treaty with the United States. Fortunately, there are about 80 countries around the world that do have treaties with the United States. So if you want to check if you are from a country that's an E2 treaty country, just Google um, Department of State E2 treaty countries, or even just E2 treaty countries, and you'll see a list that's published by the Department of State listing all those countries. The list does change. It rarely changes, but it does change. Sometimes countries fall off of the list. Sometimes countries are added. Portugal was most recently added. Israel and New Zealand were added a few years ago. So the list does change. So check the most updated list, which you can do by Googling E2 treaty countries. Now, the second important aspect of that is that you don't need to have been born in an E2 treaty country, and you don't even need to have ever been to an E2 treaty country. You just need to have a passport from an E2 treaty country. So an example I like to give is, let's say you were born and raised in Uruguay. Uruguay is not an E2 treaty country, but let's say that your parents are from Italy, so you actually also have an Italian passport. You've never been to Italy, you've spent your whole life in Uruguay. You could still apply for an E2 visa based on your Italian passport. So you just need a passport from an E2 treaty country. Now, the second requirement you see on your screen for the E2 visa is that you must make an investment, and you must make an investment in a company in the United States of which you are at least 50% owner. Okay, so again, the E2 visa, really, the E2 investor visa, really is for entrepreneurs. This is for people who want to start a business in the US, want to buy an existing business in the US, or want to start a franchise in the US. Those are kind of the three main ways that people pursue an E2 visa. So you need to make an investment in that business in the United States. So if it's a startup, it would be a matter of you putting money into the E2 business's bank account and then spending that money on things that the business needs to be operational. If you're buying a business, it would be you purchasing at least 50% of that existing business. So funds need to be at risk. What does that mean? That means that it's not sufficient to just open a business bank account in the US and transfer funds into it. That's not going to be sufficient for the visa. You actually need to spend those funds on the business. So the government uses this as a test to gauge your seriousness about the visa, that you're not just saying you want to build a business, you've actually put your own funds on the line for that business. The source of funds is also important. Now, fortunately, the government will accept a broad variety of sources. So what the government does want to see is that the funds were lawfully acquired. So they need to know that you got the funds in a legal way. But as long as you can show that the funds were lawfully acquired, you can use loans, you can use gifts from friends or family members. You can use money that you get from selling property, like an apartment, inheritance, insurance proceeds, money you've earned from work over the years. All of these are fine sources of funds. You just need to be able to document them and show exactly where those funds came from and that they were lawfully acquired. Now, one source of funds that is not acceptable is a loan that's secured by the US company. So if you take out a loan, it's secured by the US company, that is not going to pass. It's not going to be approved. Also, retained earnings of the US company do not qualify. So you first need to distribute those funds to yourself, pay taxes on them, and then you can reinvest them into the business. And that would be relevant if you already own a business that's active in the US and you're applying based on that business. How much do you need to invest? That's probably the most common question we get. We'll talk about that on the next slide. But typical expenditures, typical things that people will spend the funds on. The way I like to think about this is when you show up to your interview at the consulate, you want to be able to tell the officer that you've bought everything the business needs in order for the business to be operational. So think about, what does this business need to be operational? Well, we need an office space, so paying for rent on a commercial lease. We need equipment. We might need computers. We might need printers. We might need certain utilities like phone, internet. Marketing, we might need a website. We might need to pay for Google Ads. We might need to pay for brochures. If our business needs a vehicle, we may need to pay for that vehicle. If we're doing, for example, construction work or cleaning pools, we may need a vehicle. Um, Marketing on the vehicle, you may need to put decals on the vehicle so people know. You might need licenses for the business. You might need commercial insurance. So think about that. Is there anything else my business needs before it's actually operational so that I can show up at the consulate and tell the consular officer that once you give me this visa, I'm ready to get on a flight, get to the US, and start running this business. It doesn't need anything else. One of the best expenditures you could make is paying US workers. So think about that as well. Is it possible to hire someone to do your marketing even before you're approved to be in the US building your website? Maybe an administrator who is getting the space set up for you, starting to handle lists of prospective clients for you. Things like this are things that really can boost an application. Um, the third requirement you see on your screen is that the business cannot be marginal. That's not a word we use in everyday English, but what the government means by that is that the business needs to do more than just support the owner. The business actually needs to employ US workers. So our general recommendation is that the E2 company employ at least 3 full-time equivalent US workers within a 5-year period. The earlier you can hire, the better. The more employees, the better in general. But as long as you hit that 3 employee mark within a year or two, you're probably going to be fine once you apply to renew the visa. The business must be real and operating. This is related to what I was saying before about the investment. So it's not that the business needs to already be selling things. You don't even necessarily need employees before you apply, but you do need to get the business to a point where once you get the visa, you're ready to come to the US and immediately start operating the business. And again, how can you show that? You can show that through your investment schedule that you've bought everything the business needs to be operational, as well as including evidence in the application that you've lined everything up. Things like that would include a commercial lease showing you already have space, any letters of interest from prospective clients saying, once this business is operational, I want to do business with them. Executed contracts if that's possible. It's great if you've started selling, as long as you are not running the business within the US before you get authorization. You don't want to violate a lack of work authorization. But if you're outside the US, you can certainly have US employees who are running the business and selling products. So if you're able to do that, that's wonderful to show that as evidence in your application. Evidence that you're marketing, such as screenshots from your website, are also great. Next, you need to be coming to the US solely to develop and direct the E2 company. So this means a few things. First of all, it means that you are qualified to run the business. This is a pretty low bar. It's an opportunity for you to also advocate for yourself. Point to any degrees you have, any experience you have, and why you want to run this company. Next, you do need to be developing and directing the business. So in the application, you need to describe what your job duties will be as the E2 investor at the business. Those job duties should be those of an entrepreneur. So someone who really is looking at a high level at the financials, at the marketing, building relationships with people to drive business to your company. It is best if you are not providing direct services to clients. And the reason for this is you do not want to be competing with individuals in the domestic labor market. So, what does this mean? It's helpful to think about this through an example. Let's say that you are in the US on a student visa and you're going to school to get your accounting degree. And you want an E2 visa to build an accounting firm. Um, you would want in that application, you would want to make it clear that your role at the accounting firm is really to manage the firm. You are going to be overseeing the work of other accountants. You're not going to be doing the accounting work yourself. You're going to be hiring an accountant. You're going to be supervising their work. You're going to be looking at the overall viability of the business, focusing on marketing, focusing on financials. Um, but you're going to have other people acting as accountants. That is the way you'd want to frame that application. How you would not want to frame the application is you are going to be the accountant. You're going to be providing services to clients. That is going to be risky, especially if you're already in the US and applying through USCIS. USCIS does not like it when E2 investors are the ones providing direct services to clients. And the reason is they're competing with other accountants within the US. They're competing with people in the domestic labor market, as opposed to an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is not competing with people in the domestic labor market. In fact, they're creating opportunities for those people, such as accountants. So do be careful of that. Next, you need to own at least 50% of the E2 company. So you know, if you're starting a company or if you're buying a company, make sure you're going to own at least 50% of the company. That requirement is a constant requirement, meaning the moment your ownership share drops below 50%, you become ineligible for E2 investor status. So it's very important to keep an eye on that, especially if you're planning to sell equity. The flip side is if only 50% is required, you can have two E2 investors. You can't have more than two E2 investors in a single company, but you can have two if each owns 50%. So that could be a great option if you want to be co-owner with someone from your home country or another E2 country. Finally, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, the E2 visa is a temporary visa. So it's not a green card. It does not lead to permanent residency. So you do need to have the intent to return to your home country at the end of your visa's validity period or your period of stay. It's usually easy to show this. You would sign a letter in your application saying that that is your intention. Sometimes you may include additional evidence in your application showing your ties to your home country. Nationals of the UK always have to include that in their applications. But keep in mind that that doesn't mean you can't renew the E2 visa. You can certainly renew the E2 visa as long as you and the E2 company continue to be eligible. Um, so, you know, as an example, our firm was founded in 2014, 2013. Over 10 years ago, Ian has continued to maintain E2 status since that time. You can renew as long as your intention is not to pursue permanent residency and the business and you as the E2 investor continue to be eligible for the status. So let's quickly go back to that question I mentioned. How much of an investment is enough for an E2 visa? The government does not lay out a specific dollar amount. They say the investment needs to be substantial. So this is good and this is bad. It's bad in that it's vague. So an officer, you could invest a lot of money, and an officer could say, I just don't think the investment's substantial. That could happen as long as you're investing enough to get the business operational and your investment amount is above about $60,000. You're probably not going to run into that problem. It is somewhat dependent on the consulate you apply to. Some consulates do want to see a higher investment amount, but in general, if you're investing enough to make the business operational and you're investing above $50,000 to $60,000, your investment amount is probably going to be deemed substantial. Substantial is enough to get the business running. The government, and so it does depend on the type of business. If you are starting, say, a manufacturing company that requires a lot of machinery, maybe a lot of space, your investment amount will need to be higher. Again, you need to show the government the business is ready to be operational. If you just don't have a lot to invest, this is common, and our firm is actually proud to help people in that situation. Quite frequently, we help people in that situation. And we have a separate webinar for people who have a low investment amount or an otherwise risky E2 application. So do check out that separate webinar on our YouTube channel or attend the live webinar if you're interested. Ways that you might address that are to look at other aspects of the E2 application that you can strengthen. So even if you have a low investment amount, and by a low investment amount, I am talking about um, under $100,000 in general. That is typically deemed to be a low investment amount. You would want to do other things like focus on hiring a U.S. worker before you apply. Focus on signing contracts with clients or getting letters of interest from clients. These are things that can show the government that even though the investment amount is low, you have invested enough to employ U.S. workers and you've invested enough to get interest from clients or prospective clients in your products and services. And so that will reassure the consular officer that even though the investment amount is low, the investment amount is sufficient to get this business operating. And finally, franchises are a good option for E2 visas. Franchises are kind of in between a startup and purchasing an existing business for a few reasons. First of all, you are starting a new franchise, so you will have to do many of the steps that a startup would require, getting space lined up, getting the equipment that's needed, marketing the company. But you have the track record of an existing franchise to help you out. And oftentimes the franchisor will give you significant support. They'll help you figure out the computer systems to use, how to market, how to get your product set up, whether that's food or another service you're providing. So franchises we do find can be a great option for an E2 visa. Final slide on the E2 visa is regarding employees. I mentioned before that you do need to hire US employees for the E2 visa. If you are applying with a startup, meaning a business that does not already have employees, then you will need to have a business plan in your application that clearly lays out for the government exactly how you're going to get to the point of employing at least 3 US workers within a 5-year period. Again, the earlier the better, the more employees in general, the better. But your business plan is going to be what lays out for the government how you're going to do that. So no need to employ US workers before you apply. If that is your situation, you do need to have a business plan though. If you are purchasing a business, an existing business, it's good to purchase a business that is already employing workers. Because if you purchase a business that's been operating for a few years and it doesn't have employees, you're going to need to explain to the consulate why that is and how you're going to do things differently to overcome that negative employment history. So position yourself in the best position possible by purchasing a business that is already employing workers. And if you do that, then it's much easier to show the consulate, look, we already have satisfied the employment requirement. And that's a huge hurdle that's already overcome at that point. One last point that I didn't mention in a previous slide is when we're talking about the investment amount, I'm going to go back to the previous slide. Many people are understandably concerned about investing money into a business in the US. What if the business fails? What if I'm denied a visa? Do all those funds go away? In practice, you may be able to come to an agreement with say the landlord, for example, the person who is selling you a significant asset, to, if your visa is denied, to get a refund on those assets, to get the money back to some degree. That is going to be a difficult process. It's going to be time consuming. So understandably, what a lot of people opt for is escrow. Escrow is an opportunity to put your funds into a third party's account, the escrow agent's account. That's oftentimes a lawyer or a bank. And then once your visa is approved, those funds are released to the seller. And if your visa is not approved, the funds go back to you. So an escrow agreement is okay. The government doesn't have a problem with escrow agreements. if the only condition is approval of the visa. So you do want to make sure that in your escrow agreement, it says the moment the visa is approved, the funds are being released. There can be no other condition in the agreement. Also, we find escrow agreements are better suited when there are significant assets that are being purchased. So escrow wouldn't make sense if you're, spending money at Best Buy on computers and you're spending money at the Home Depot on, you know, items for your business. Um, but if you're buying 50% of a business, so you have a lump sum that you're paying the seller, escrow could be great for that. Escrow might be good for a franchise if they're willing to agree to that. So to release the franchise fee and any other payments you need to pay to the franchisor. Potentially, if you're paying a lump sum to the landlord, you might use escrow for that. But by and large, it really is in scenarios where you're purchasing an existing business where an escrow agreement can make sense and can protect your funds. So let's switch gears real quick. We've been talking about the E2 non-immigrant temporary visa. Let's talk about some green card options. Again, these are green card options for entrepreneurs. The first we're going to talk about is the EB2 National Interest Waiver. So EB2, anytime you see EB, it refers to employment-based. So this is an employment-based green card. 2 is referring to the preference category. The next slide, we'll talk about the EB1. EB1s are for people who are at the top of their field internationally. They really are the leaders of their field. EB2 is a step down. You don't need to be, nationally or internationally recognized for your accomplishments, but you do still need to be fairly toward the top of your field. You need to satisfy the requirements we'll talk about in a moment. Later in the presentation, we'll talk about EB5, which is the 5th preference category. The EB5 is different. It is not an extraordinary ability green card option. It is an investor and a job creation green card, but we'll talk about that later. The EB2 NIW, again, NIW stands for National Interest Waiver, is a great option for entrepreneurs. And the reason is that you can self-petition for a national interest waiver. That means you don't need a separate employer to petition your green card or sponsor you for the green card. This was made especially clear in a 2017 case called Matter of Danisar. You see it on your screen there. The Matter of Danisar did a couple big things. The first thing it did was it laid out how you qualify for a national interest waiver. And really, the ways that you do that are, first of all, you show the government that you're going to be pursuing a proposed endeavor. You're going to be pursuing an endeavor that is of substantial merit and in the national interest. So it's of national importance. So the endeavor, the thing you're going to be in the US doing is of substantial merit and of national importance, and that you are the ideal person to pursue that endeavor. So it's really two big pieces, one about the endeavor, one about you, and that you're well suited to pursue that endeavor. The third part of an NIW is typically satisfied if you can satisfy those two requirements, and is basically showing the government that they should waive the later labor certification process, which is what allows you to self-petition for the NIW. But if you show the government you're pursuing this proposed endeavor that is of substantial merit, national importance, and that you're the ideal person to do it, typically you can automatically show that the labor certification should be waived. Now, to qualify for an NIW, there are certain threshold requirements. So you do need to satisfy these threshold requirements before you even get to satisfying these two buckets I talked about. So the threshold requirements are that you must either have an advanced degree, a master's, for example, or a bachelor's degree plus 5 years of experience in your field, or that you are an individual of exceptional ability. Now, exceptional ability, really, there are a number of ways that you can show this. The government has listed a number of criteria that they will look at to see whether you satisfy this requirement and are of exceptional ability. So some examples, I'm not going to go through all of them, and we actually do have a separate full-length webinar on the NIW. Do check it out if you're interested. We go through all of the requirements, evidence you can use. So these can include proof that you have a degree or a certificate from an educational institution, letters showing that you have at least 10 years of full-time experience in your occupation. If you have a license to practice a specific profession, that you're commanding a particularly high salary in your field, that can be a piece of evidence to show that you have exceptional ability. Recognition for your achievements. So if you've received awards, if you've received government grants, if you've received funding from venture capital firms, these can all be used to show that you've been recognized for your achievements. And you can also use comparable evidence if you don't have evidence that falls into these buckets that I've shared before. So a few final points on the NIW. Going back to the two buckets, let's say you do satisfy the threshold requirements, you have either an advanced degree, a bachelor's degree with 5 years of experience, or you satisfy the exceptional ability criteria. You get past that, now you're looking at those two buckets, that the proposed endeavor is of national importance, substantial merit, and that you're the ideal person to pursue that endeavor. Keep in mind that it is possible to apply for a national interest waiver based on economic impact. Now, it's not easy to qualify, but it certainly can be done. So the reason I raise this is because we're talking about for entrepreneurs in this presentation. So let's say you have an E2 company. It's done very well. It employs several dozen people, and you would want to show that your business is employing several dozen people if you're trying to qualify based on job creation. Then you would make that argument that the national importance and substantial merit of my business is job creation, ideally in an area of high unemployment, of economic depression, where you really are creating job opportunities where they need to be created. Ideally, the business would also have some other aspect of and merit. So let's say that it's a business that does research on a health-related field, so a public health field, or potentially national defense. Let's say that you manufacture batteries or computer products that are relevant to the government and national defense. These are examples of how you would make these arguments. Your proposed endeavor is of substantial merit and national importance. Don't think that just because you're not impacting the entire country of the United States that you don't qualify. Do set up consultation, because there are oftentimes ways to frame the application and really advocate for yourself to show that even if you really are positively benefiting a certain town or city, that this is sufficient to meet this requirement. So that's the EB2 National Interest Waiver. Let's now talk about the EB1, and specifically the EB1A. EB1A is a great fit for entrepreneurs, people who own their own business, are developing and directing their own business. Now, as I mentioned before, the EB1A does have a higher requirement than the EB2. So this is really for people of extraordinary ability, meaning that they are at the top of their field, nationally or internationally. So you do need to meet at least 3 of the criteria that you see on your field. And then after you've satisfied those 3 requirements, the government is going to do a second look. It's called the Kazarian analysis, where they look at the whole application and they decide whether they think you should move forward. This is a very frustrating aspect of the EB1A. But we do find that it is certainly possible to overcome that requirement if the application is prepared properly. Um, so let's spend a little bit of time looking at the criteria to qualify for an EB-1A. You don't need to satisfy all of these. Again, it's at least three. So ideally, you would have more than three. But evidence of your membership in associations that require outstanding achievement. So if you're a member of a group or an association that is very selective about its members in your field, that could qualify as a piece of evidence or as satisfying the criterion. Evidence that you've published material, or sorry, that material has been published about you in major trade publications or other major media. So if there are newspaper articles, news stories about you, about your business, about your accomplishments, that can be used. Um, Evidence that you've been asked to judge the work of others. So if you're on panels, if you're attending conferences and you are responsible for deciding who else gets to attend or present at the conference, that can be relevant. Evidence of your original scientific, scholarly, or business-related contributions of major significance to the field. So if you publish on your work, if you have articles, if you have a very significant blog, these can all be considered original contributions. If you've kind of spearheaded some practice, as an example, a client was focused on agriculture, and through his business, he spearheaded a very innovative way to grow vegetables and fruits in very hot climates. So that was his original business contribution. That's certainly relevant. Evidence of your authorship of scholarly articles. So if you do happen to publish in scholarly journals, that can be relevant. Maybe not as relevant for entrepreneurs. That typically is for people who are researchers, but if you do publish in your field, for example, if you have a business that's focused on artificial intelligence and you publish on artificial intelligence, that can be used as evidence. Evidence that your work has been displayed at artistic exhibitions, not so relevant for entrepreneurs. Evidence of your performance of a leading or critical role in distinguished organizations. So if you have been a manager at a distinguished organization, whether that's nonprofit, whether that's for profit, a government agency, that can be evidence. If your business, if you've started businesses in the past and they have achieved distinction, you can use this piece of evidence to show that, or this criterion to show that. Evidence that you command a high salary. Again, you're really looking at, say you're a CEO and you're at your company, you would look at what is the average salary given to CEOs across the United States. How does my salary compare? If it is, 2 or 3 times higher than the average CEO salary, you may be able to use that criterion. All right. So for both the National Interest Waiver and the EB-1A, the process is similar. You do have the ability to self-petition, meaning you don't need a third-party employer to sponsor you for the green card. You can sponsor yourself. And it really is 2 steps. Step one is going to be filing what's called the Form I-140 with USCIS. And that form is laying out how you qualify for the green card. It's laying out all of the things we talked about before, how you meet the threshold requirements, how you meet the requirements of extraordinary or exceptional ability. That's what's going to be laid out in the I-140. Once the I-140 is approved, the government will then consider your actual green card application, which is if you're inside the US, that's the Form I-485. If you're outside the US, it'd be a DS-260 submitted to the consulate. And that really is you asking the government to give you a green card. So the important thing to keep in mind in terms of timing on this is if you're outside the US, your only option is to file the DS-260. And you would do that after the I-140 is approved. If you're inside the US, you could apply at a consulate. Let's say you're here on a student visa applying for a national interest waiver. You'd submit the I-140, and you do have the option to apply for an immigrant visa at a consulate by filing the DS-260. You could also, as an alternative, again, if you're inside the US, you could also file an I-485 within the US, which is the application to adjust status within the US. The benefit of filing an I-485 inside the US is that you can, at the same time, file an application for a work permit and a travel permit. Those applications are taking 6 to 9 months around there. But once they're approved, you do have unrestricted work authorization and travel authorization. So that is a big benefit if you can wait that 6 month to 9 month period for those approvals. A couple things. The I-140, how long is it taking? You do have the option to pay for premium processing on the I-140. That is about a $3,000 fee. The government will get you a decision within 45 business days. That is a very fast turnaround. If you don't opt for that, your application could take months, possibly a year plus. So premium processing can be a great option if you want a decision quickly. The other thing that is important to note is that if your category is current, then you can file the I-485 at the same time that you file the I-140. That means you can also apply for that work authorization and travel authorization. So to see what that means, what does it mean for my category to be current? You're going to need to use what's called the Visa Bulletin. If you just Google Visa Bulletin, Department of State, you should be able to find it. Right now, it's issued every month. So right now, the July Visa Bulletin is the most recent one. If you're able to visit that website, Visa Bulletin, you'll scroll down to the employment-based green cards, and you'll see a table. And that table is organized by preference category. So you see first, second, third, that's the EB1, EB2, EB3. That's what first, second, and third are referring to. That's the preference category. In the second category, you see a bunch of dates, and those dates are organized based on the country in which you were born. So in contrast to the E2 visa, where you only need a passport from the country, for a green card, it's your country of birth that controls. So you see that if you were born in China and you're applying for a second preference employment-based green card, right now, green cards are available to those who applied in December of 2020. So there is about a 4.5 year delay for those born in China. If you were born in India, they're seeing applications from January of 2013. So 12-year delay. That's quite a long delay. Mexico and the Philippines, it's looking at about a 2-year delay before your green card's available. And if you were born in any other country in the world, that's all chargeability areas except those listed, you're looking at about, again, a 2-year, 1.5, 2-year delay on that. So what that means is that if you're applying in that second preference category, you cannot file the I-485 at the same time as the I-140. Your category needs to be current before you can file the I-485 or the DS-260. So you do need to wait for your category to be current. However, if you're looking at the Visa Bulletin right now, you will see that in the first category, so that's EB1, there is a C for Mexico, Philippines, and all other countries other than China and India. So if you're in the US and you are from, say, Uruguay, and you're filing an EB1 application, you can file the I-485 at the same time that you're filing the I-140 because the category is current. And what that means is at the same time that you file the I-485, you can file the applications for work permission and travel permission. So that can be a significant benefit to people. It's certainly worth considering. All right, so let me quickly move that. Great. So that talks a bit about the process. It is a bit complicated. An additional wrinkle is if you have a temporary visa like an E2 and you're looking to move to a green card, you need to be very careful about the timing of applying for the green card. And the reason is once you file that green card application, it shows the government that they should question your intention to temporarily be in the US because there's a pending green card application. So there are ways to reduce that risk, and we're happy to help our clients navigate that. Do schedule a consultation if you have questions about that. It is certainly worth talking with a lawyer to navigate that. Finally, let's talk about our last green card option, which is the EB5 investor green card. This is also called the EB5 job creation green card, because at the heart of the EB5 is investing money into a business, an EB5 business, and second of all, creating jobs from that investment. Those are the two pillars of the EB5 green card. We, again, like the other visa and green card categories, we have a separate webinar on just the EB5. It's an hour long, goes into great detail, so do check that out either live or on our YouTube channel. Schedule a consultation if you have questions about the EB5. But let's talk about some aspects of the EB5 on right now on this slide and the next one. So the first thing to know is that there are really two pathways to an EB5 green card. The first is called the regional center option, and the second is called the direct investment or standalone EB5 option. I'm going to start with the direct investment or standalone option because I think it's the easiest to understand. That option gives you, as the EB5 investor, the ability to really run your own business. Uh, it is, let's say you have an E2 company, it's done very well. Let's say it's a restaurant. You've been running it for a few years on the E2. It has the potential to create 10 jobs or has already based on your investment. That would be a direct investment EB5 because you are the one actively managing the company. You are going to be investing your funds into the company, and the company is going to have direct employees employed from that investment, meaning W2 employees. That's the direct investment option. It's very active. It has the potential for high return if your business well. The regional center option is a far more passive option. A regional center is the projects that they do tend to be very large. We're talking building resorts, building public transportation hubs, building shopping centers, projects that require tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, and so therefore can take EB5 investments from dozens of people. A direct investment can only support one EB5 investor. The regional center can support dozens. So you may have, 50 or 100 people each contributing $800,000 to the regional center. That is what you oftentimes see with regional centers. Regional center projects, you as the EB5 investor, like I said, are typically very passive. So you're not going to be making active decisions regarding that resort. You are going to typically be a limited partner, really with no direct say in what's going on at the resort or what paint color, it has, or things like that. Any decisions will not be yours to make. You really are just putting your money in and waiting for the money to be eventually returned to you, typically with a very low rate of return. So that really is the distinction. Regional center is great for people who want to be passive and just kind of want to invest, wait, and then apply for the green card. Direct investment is for people who they're actively involved with their business. They want to stay actively involved in their business and pursue that route. As long as your ownership share is above 0, there's not really an ownership requirement for the EB5. So you do need some ownership, but it's not like the E2 where you need at least 50% ownership. So given what I've already shared about these two pathways, regional center, direct investment, let's get into a bit more detail in terms of the requirements. How much do you need to invest? So the EB5 does have a very clear investment requirement. It is at a minimum $800,000, and that investment amount applies if the business is in an area of high unemployment or a rural area. It's called a targeted employment area. If the business is in a targeted employment area and the jobs being created are in a targeted employment area, Generally speaking, you can qualify for that lower investment amount of $800,000. Almost all regional centers are in targeted employment areas. So if you're going through a regional center, almost always you'll be investing that $800,000 amount. If the business is not in a targeted employment area, so let's say you have your E2 business, your restaurant, it's in a very affluent area in California, you may not qualify as a TEA, so you need to invest $1,050,000. That higher investment amount is if the business and the jobs created are outside of a TEA. New commercial enterprise, that is what the EB5 business is called. That is the entity that's actually creating the jobs. I already mentioned targeted employment areas, investment versus retained earnings. This is particularly relevant for people pursuing the direct investment route. The takeaway is that for an EB5, the investment, the $800,000 or $1,050,000, needs to be your personal funds. So it is not sufficient if you have a business, it has retained earnings, and you're just using those funds for your EB5 investment. You need to first distribute those earnings to yourself. You need to pay taxes on them, document that distribution, reinvest the funds into the business, and then from there, create those 10 jobs. Past jobs don't count if they weren't created from your personal investment. So you need to make sure that your EB5 investment happens and then the 10 jobs are created. Again, that's mostly relevant for direct investment. If you're going through a regional center, they are going to generally handle the employment piece, make sure that the funds invested led to the employment. And regional centers can also use indirect employment, which is a significant benefit, meaning jobs that were indirectly created, say, by the resort. So contractors, for example, can count. Direct investment, they need to be direct employees, W-2 employees. So 10 full-time jobs need to be created from the EB5 investor's investment. If you haven't created those jobs by the time you apply, you do need a detailed business plan showing how you will create those jobs. You do have quite a bit of time to create the jobs. So you have through the conditional permanent resident period. I realize I'm jumping a bit ahead by saying that, but if you see on your screen EB5 filing, I-526, I-485, I-829, we talked before about the EB1, EB2, the process. The EB5 is different because, first of all, you're filing an I-526 and not an I-140. But second of all, if your green card is approved, you get a conditional green card for 2 years before you get the permanent green card. And to remove the conditions on your conditional green card, you file a form I-829. So in terms of job creation, you file the I-526 and the I-485. That's going to take a few years to be approved. And then you file the I-829 after you've had the green card for 2 years. You have that 2-year period of conditional permanent resident status to create those jobs. So you do have a few years to create the jobs. When you file the I-526, the first stage, you should have committed the funds to the business. They should be in the business's bank account, but you do have time for that job creation. And challenges for the EB5, particularly for direct investors, and frankly, really any EB5 investment is you need to document the source of funds. It is a very demanding process. The government is going to scrutinize every document and make sure that every dollar invested in the EB5 business is accounted for and was lawfully acquired. So be ready for that. You can prepare by keeping clear documentation of every single dollar you're putting into the EB5 business. All right, a few other EB5 considerations. So the regional center option is still considered a pilot program. So it was started in the early 1990s. Sometimes it does expire. It expired in 2021 for about 9 months. So the government stopped processing those applications. That is not supposed to happen until 2027. So when the government reauthorized the program, they basically said through 2027, the program's going to function. And if you file your application before 2026 or 2026 or before, we're going to decide your application, your regional center application. So the regional center program is a little bit more tenuous than the direct investor program. The direct investment program is more stable. It is not a pilot program. So do keep that in mind. You can use loans and gifts, though you need to clearly document where those funds came from. Also, the funds cannot be secured by the EB5 business. You cannot have a guaranteed return on your investment. The government wants to see those funds are at risk. In terms of timing, one thing I do want to say is that the government, this is a good thing. It created a few carve outs. So it reserved certain EB5 visas for high unemployment areas, rural areas, and infrastructure projects. And so if you are from a country with a backlog on the green cards, look at applying in a high unemployment, rural, or into an infrastructure project that could ensure that your green card is current. So if you're born in China or India in particular, check that out. You may want to, in particular, make sure the project is in a targeted employment area. It could give you the ability to file an I-485 along with the I-526, which could give you work authorization and travel authorization along with it. Finally, a few miscellaneous options that I just want to put out there. Also, feel free to send in any questions if you have them. The L1, this is an option if you've been working for a company abroad for at least a year and you are being sent to the United States to work for a company that is affiliated with or owned by that foreign company. So you do need to have that established employment relationship. The L1 can be used to set up a new office in the United States. It's a bit more exacting, the requirements, and also it's only a 1-year visa for the new office. But if you do want to set up a new office in the United States for a company abroad, that can be an option. You don't have to invest in the company. There are a few benefits to the L1, but frankly, if someone is qualifying for both an L1 and an E2, we would typically recommend the E2 route. The L1 is a temporary visa. It is a green card. The international entrepreneur rule, frankly, I'm not going to spend much time on it. We have a separate presentation on it, and also it is very iffy. Even under the Biden administration, there were very few of these approved. It is parole, which on each entry to the US, the government decides whether they're going to let you in a way that they don't for a visa. Especially under this administration, it is hard to recommend the international entrepreneur rule. But if you're curious about it, do reach out. It could be an option if you know you want to sell equity in your company and your ownership share is going to drop, and if no other options work for you, no other visa options work for you. You're not from a treaty country, etc. The diversity lottery, it is a lottery, so no real downside to entering the diversity lottery each year. And if you're chosen, great, you can apply for a green card. Most people are not chosen, though. It's hard to be chosen, but we definitely know people who have been chosen for it. The E1 trader visa. This is similar to an E2 with certain specific differences. This is for people who are basically engaged in trade between the US and the treaty country. So whereas an E2 visa, you can just start a business in the US that does not engage in international trade. Let's say you're starting a law firm based in the US and it's just giving legal advice in the US. That would not be trade. So that would be good for an E2. Let's say you're from Italy, you're buying things from Italy to sell in the US on via Amazon. That could be a great option for the E1. So E1 can be great because there's no requirement to hire employees, no requirement that you actually even set up an entity in the United States. So could be a great option depending on the circumstances. If you do have any questions or would like to discuss over a consultation, don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be happy to talk with you. check out that email we'll send after this presentation to find the link where you can schedule consultations. In the meantime, do stay well. We hope to see you soon.